Everyone refused to bond with the blind and disabled alien princess, except one human. The great hall of Nexus Prime Station stretched wide like the belly of a sleeping giant. And today, it held the most important gathering in the Galaxy 12. Species had sent their finest representatives to attend the bonding ceremony of the Zethrani Empire. And each one stood in their designated area with pride written across their alien faces. The Zethrani were ancient and powerful. Their bodies tall and elegant with wings that shimmered like liquid silver in the light. And their eyes could see colors that other species could not even imagine. To bond with Zethrani royalty meant wealth and protection and influence that would last for generations. So every representative had prepared gifts and speeches and promises. Emperor Kalthus stood on the raised platform at the center of the hall. His four wings spread wide to show his authority, and his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. "Today we offer a sacred bond," he announced. Though his voice carried something heavy beneath the formal words, "My daughter, Princess Valith, seeks a partner from among the allied species." The crowd shifted with excitement as servants opened the doors behind the Emperor. Princess Valith walked slowly into the hall, and the excitement died like a flame dropped in water. She was small for a Zethrani, a body thin and her movements careful and measured, and her wings hung limp against her back, twisted and underdeveloped, unable to ever carry her into the sky. But worse than this, her eyes stared forward without focus, pale and clouded where they should have been bright with the famous Zethrani glow. She was blind. Whispers spread through the hall like poison, and representatives exchanged looks of confusion and disgust. The Emperor's face remained stone, but his wings folded tight against his back in shame he could not fully hide. "The Korthani delegation may approach first," he said. The Korthani ambassador was massive, his scaled body covered in ceremonial armor, and he walked toward Valith with heavy steps that shook the floor. He circled her once, twice, examining her the way a merchant examines damaged goods. "This one is broken," he declared loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Korthani do not bond with defective creatures." He walked away without looking back, and Valith stood perfectly still, her face showing nothing. The Sylvari came next, their ambassador gliding forward on 8 graceful legs, and she studied Valith with her many eyes before speaking in a voice like silk hiding thorns. "A blind Zethrani cannot fulfill ceremonial duties," she said. "Bonding with her would bring shame to our hive mothers." One by one they came, and one by one they refused. The Druvan claimed she had no political value. The Molthari said their ancestors would curse such a union, and the Theshan representatives simply laughed and walked away. 12 species, and not one would accept the princess. With clouded eyes and broken wings, Sergeant Una Park watched from the back of the hall, where the human delegation stood in their simple uniforms. Humans were new to the Galactic Alliance, barely 50 years since first contact, and they were not important enough to be offered a place in the bonding ceremony. They were only here to observe, to learn, to stay quiet. And Smalyuna was 28 years old, with black hair cut short for military efficiency, and she had grown up in the farming provinces of New Korea before joining the diplomatic corps. She had seen cruelty before, but watching these powerful aliens reject a young woman for something she could not control made her stomach twist with anger. Valith stood alone on the platform as the last representative returned to his place, and the Emperor's wings trembled with barely controlled emotion. "If no species will accept the bond," he said, his voice cracking, "then the ceremony is, I will bond with her." The words left Yuna's mouth before she could stop them, and suddenly every eye in the hall turned toward the small human woman pushing through the crowd. Her commanding officer grabbed her arm and hissed a warning, but Yuna shook him off and kept walking. The silence in the hall was absolute, the kind of silence that comes before storms break. "You dare?" The Korthani ambassador growled. You are human, the weakest species in the Alliance. Yuna ignored him and climbed the steps to the platform where Valeth stood up close. She could see that the princess was trembling, the tiniest shake in her hands that she was fighting to control. And Yuna felt her heart break for this girl who had stood through so much cruelty without a single tear. I volunteer for the sacred bond, Yuna said clearly. If the princess will have me, Valeth turned toward her voice. And though her eyes could not see, something in her face softened with confusion. Why? She whispered, so quiet that only Yuna could hear. Because you deserve better than this. Yuna whispered back. The Emperor stared at the human woman who had just changed everything. And after a long moment, he spoke. The human has volunteered, he said. The laws of the ceremony are clear. Any allied species may offer a bond. Protests erupted from the other delegations. But the Emperor raised his hand for silence. Do you understand what you are asking, human? He asked. The bonding ritual has killed lesser species before. I understand, Yuna said. And she did not look away from his ancient eyes. Valeth reached out with one hand, searching for Yuna's presence, and Yuna took her hand gently. Then let it be witnessed, the Emperor declared. A human has claimed the princess of the Zithrani Empire. The chamber erupted in chaos. But Yuna only had eyes for the blind princess, whose hand fit so perfectly in hers. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had made the right choice. Everyone refused to bond with the blind and disabled alien princess, except one human. The bonding chamber was ancient and cold, carved from black stone that seemed to swallow all light. And Yuna stood in its center wearing nothing but a simple white robe. 3 days had passed since she volunteered. And in those 3 days she had learned just how much the Zithrani court hated her decision servants, refused to speak to her directly. Nobles walked past her as if she did not exist. And she had overheard more than one conversation about the primitive ape who dared to touch royalty. But Valeth had visited her every day, sitting with her in comfortable silence, or asking quiet questions about Earth and humans and why. Yuna had truly stepped forward now. The time for questions was over. The ritual was about to begin. Emperor Kalthos stood at the edge of the chamber with his advisors, and his face showed nothing of his thoughts as he watched the human prepare. The bonding ritual creates a telepathic connection, the head priest explained to Yuna, his voice carrying clear warning. Your minds will touch, and if they are not compatible, the weaker mind will break. Humans have never survived this bond. Another priest added, your brain is too simple, too fragile. Yuna took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Let us begin. She said. Valeth was led into the chamber by 2 attendants, and she wore a robe of deep blue that matched the color her eyes should have been. The priest began to chant in the old Zithrani language, and symbols on the walls began to glow with soft golden light. Valeth knelt across from Yuna, and even without sight, she reached out and found Yuna's hands with perfect accuracy. You can still withdraw, Valeth whispered. No one would blame you. Would you blame me? Yuna asked. Valeth was silent for a moment before answering. No, but I would understand. Then I stay. The chanting grew louder, and suddenly pain exploded through Yuna's skull like fire burning through her thoughts. She felt Valeth's mind pressing against hers, vast and ancient and filled with colors she had no names for. And it was like standing beneath a waterfall of pure sensation. Memories flooded through her. Valeth's memories, a childhood spent in dark rooms while other children flew and played. The sound of her mother weeping when the healers confirmed her blindness was permanent. The feeling of her father's disappointment like a weight she could never escape, and beneath all of that, loneliness so deep it seemed to have no bottom. Yuna pushed back with her own memories. Growing up on a farm under an orange sky, learning to walk again after a transport accident broke her legs when she was 12. Her grandmother telling her that strength was not about never falling, but about always getting back up. She showed Valith images of Earth oceans that stretched beyond the horizon, mountains that touched the clouds, and billions of humans who lived and loved and struggled and survived. She showed her the history of humanity, all the broken and damaged and different people who had changed the world, scientists who could not walk, artists who could not hear, leaders who saw the world differently than everyone else. And through it all, she pushed one feeling stronger than any other. You are not broken, she thought across their new bond. You are exactly who you are meant to be. Pain reached a peak that nearly shattered her consciousness. And then suddenly, it was gone. Yuna opened her eyes and found herself lying on the cold stone floor, breathing hard and covered in sweat. But she was alive, and she could feel Valith in her mind now. A gentle presence, like a second heartbeat. Impossible, one of the priests whispered. The human survived. Valith was crying, silver tears running down her face. And she reached for Yuna with shaking hands. I saw, she said, her voice breaking. I saw everything, your world, your people, your heart. Yuna sat up slowly and pulled the princess into her arms, holding her while she cried. I meant what I showed you, Yuna said softly. Every moment, in the days that followed, Yuna dedicated herself to being the best bonded partner Valith could ask for. She learned that Valith could see through their bond. Now, not with her own eyes, but through Yuna's when the connection was strong enough. So Yuna began describing the world in ways that went beyond simple sight. The sunset is not just orange, she would say as they walked through the palace gardens. It feels like warmth on tired skin and tastes like the last bite of sweet fruit. She created systems to help Valith navigate independently, using small devices that vibrated in different patterns to signal directions and distances. She never once treated Valith as helpless, pushing her to learn and grow and discover what she was truly capable of. The court watched all of this with suspicion and contempt. The human treats the princess like a common soldier, one noble complained, making her work and struggle. It is disgraceful. But Valith was smiling more than anyone had ever seen, and the emperor noticed even if he said nothing. One evening, a courtly ambassador approached Yuna at a formal dinner. You collected a broken toy, he said with a cruel smile. Humans do this, yes? You keep damaged things because yourselves are damaged. Yuna looked at him calmly and felt Valith's quiet anger through their bond. We keep precious things, Yuna replied, and we protect them with everything we have. Later that night, Valith found Yuna on a balcony overlooking the city. Why did you really volunteer? She asked. The true reason. Yuna thought carefully before answering. Because someone should have, she said simply. And no one else would. Valith was quiet for a long moment. And then through their bond, Yuna felt something she had never expected. Trust. Complete and absolute. There is something you should know, Valith whispered. My uncle has been meeting with strange people in the lower city. Before Yuna could respond, an urgent message arrived from the palace intelligence service. An assassin had been hired to eliminate Princess Valith before she could produce heirs, and the payment had come from within the royal family itself. Everyone refused to bond with the blind and disabled alien princess, except one human. The training room echoed with the sound of movement as Yuna guided Valith through another combat drill. Listen to the air, Yuna instructed, circling slowly around the princess. Feel how it shifts when I move. Valith stood perfectly still, her head tilted slightly as she focused on sensations beyond sight. When Yuna lunged forward, Valith spun away and caught her arm with surprising precision. Better, Yuna said with a smile that Valith could feel through their bond. Much better. 2 weeks had passed since the assassination threat was discovered, and Yuna had refused to let Valith hide in her chambers like the court advisors suggested. Instead, She had begun training the princess every single day. The Zithrani had always assumed that without sight, Valith was helpless, but humans knew better. Yuna had grown up reading stories of blind warriors and disabled soldiers who had learned to fight in ways that confused and overwhelmed their enemies. She taught Valith to use her other senses: hearing that could track footsteps across a room, touch that could feel vibrations through the floor, and their bond that connected them mind to mind. Your enemies expect weakness, Yuna explained as they rested between sessions. That expectation is your greatest weapon. Through their bond, Valith experienced fragments of Yuna's memories almost every day. Now she saw Earth's history. The countless humans who had been told they were broken, but who wasn't to do impossible things. She saw a human named Beethoven who created beautiful music even after losing his hearing. She saw soldiers who lost limbs but returned to battle with metal replacements and fire in their hearts. She saw a whole species that refused to accept limits, that fought against their own bodies and their own world, and somehow always found a way to survive. Humans are strange, Valith said one night as they sat together in her chambers. You break so easily, but you never seem to stay broken. We are stubborn, Yuna admitted. It is perhaps our only real talent. The assassination attempt came on the 18th night. Yuna woke from shallow sleep with every instinct screaming danger. And through the bond she could feel Valith's sudden fear as the princess sensed something wrong in her own chambers next door. Without thinking, Yuna grabbed her blade and burst through the connecting door. A Selvari shadow stalker stood over Valith's bed, its 8 legs perfectly silent on the stone floor, and a poisoned knife gleaming in its primary arm. The assassin turned toward Yuna with inhuman speed. But Yuna was already moving. Humans were not the fastest species in the galaxy, but they were persistent predators who had spent millions of years hunting across endless plains. They did not need to be fast, they needed to be relentless. Yuna fought with a fury that surprised even herself, trading blow for blow with the shadow stalker as Valith scrambled away from the bed. The assassin was skilled, its movements flowing like water, and its 8 limbs attacking from angles that should have been impossible to defend against. But Yuna had something the assassin did not expect through the bond. Valith was feeding her information. Sounds the assassin made, vibrations it created, the subtle shifts in air that betrayed its movements a split second before they happened. And Yuna used everything Valith gave her, and slowly she began to push the assassin back. When the shadow stalker finally made a mistake, Yuna did not hesitate. Her blade found the gap in its armor, and the assassin fell with a sound like breaking glass. Palace guards arrived moments later, but the fight was already over. Yuna stood breathing hard over the body, blood dripping from a dozen small wounds, and Valith rushed to her side with hands that searched desperately for injuries. You are hurt, Valith said, her voice shaking. I am alive, Yuna replied. And so are you. The investigation that followed revealed what Yuna had already suspected. The assassination order had come from Prince Valros, the Emperor's younger brother, who believed the throne should pass to his own perfect children rather than to a blind and broken niece. But Valros was clever, and the evidence was not enough to arrest a prince of the blood. He will try again, Valith said as they discussed the situation with trusted advisors. As long as I live in shadow, he has endless chances. Yuna had been thinking the same thing, and she had an idea that the advisors would hate. Then we stop hiding, she said. The Grand Alliance gathering is in 3 days. Every species, every ambassador, every important person in the galaxy will be there. The advisors immediately protested, calling the idea suicide, but Yuna spoke over them. If we attend publicly, Valros loses his advantage, she explained. He cannot send assassins against us in front of the entire galaxy, not without exposing himself. Unless he is desperate enough to try anyway, an advisor argued. Then we will be ready. Yuna said she looked at Valeth and felt the princess's fear through their bond. But beneath that fear was something stronger, determination. I am tired of hiding, Valeth said quietly. I have hidden my entire life. The Emperor, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke. You would risk my daughter's life on this gamble? He asked Yuna. I would risk my own life to give her a chance to truly live. Yuna answered. The Emperor studied the human woman for a long moment, and something shifted in his ancient eyes. Very well, he said. You will attend the gathering. As they prepared over the following days, Valeth found Yuna alone on the same balcony where they had spoken before through their bond. She could feel something unusual in her partner's emotions. You are afraid, Valeth said softly. But not for yourself. Yuna was quiet for a moment before answering. I am afraid of failing you, she admitted. I am afraid that I promised to protect you, and that I will not be strong enough. Valeth reached out and took Yuna's hand. No one has ever been afraid for me before, she said. They were always afraid of what I represented, the shame, the broken bloodline. She squeezed Yuna's hand gently. Thank you for being afraid for me, she whispered. It means more than you know. Yuna squeezed back and made a silent promise to herself, whatever came at the gathering. She would protect this princess with her last breath. She had made a vow, and humans did not break their vows easily. Everyone refused to bond with the blind and disabled. Alien princes, except one human. The Grand Alliance gathering filled the largest hall in Nexus Prime Station, and thousands of beings from across the galaxy mingled beneath lights that shifted through every color imaginably. Yuna walked beside Valeth with her hand resting near her weapon, her eyes constantly scanning the crowd for threats. The princess wore a gown of deep silver that matched her wings, and though those wings would never carry her through the sky, they caught the light beautifully as she moved. Whispers followed them through the hall. The broken princess and her human pet, someone muttered, and others laughed. Valeth held her head high and pretended not to hear. But Yuna felt the sting of those words through their bond. They are jealous, Yuna said quietly. You outshine every person in this room. Valeth's lips curved in a small smile, and she walked a little taller. Representatives from every major species watched as they passed. And Yuna noticed that not all the looks were hostile. Some seemed curious, others confused, and a few even showed something like respect. Perhaps the story of the assassination attempt had spread. Or perhaps some beings simply admired courage, regardless of its source. Prince Valrus stood near the central platform with his wife and two perfect children, and his smile was sharp as a blade when he saw Valeth approaching. Dear niece, he called out loudly enough for those nearby to hear. How brave of you to attend. I hope the lights are not too overwhelming for your condition. My condition has never prevented me from seeing the truth about people, Valeth replied calmly, even without eyes. Some things are very clear. The prince's smile flickered for just a moment before he laughed and turned away. Yuna marked his position in her mind and kept watching. The attack came 2 hours into the gathering. When most guests had relaxed and security had grown comfortable, it began with the lights flickering once, twice, and then dying completely in the darkness. Yuna heard the sound of weapons being drawn and bodies hitting the floor. She grabbed Valeth and pulled. Her clothes as emergency lights cast weak red shadows across the chaos-fied assassins. Emerged from the crowd, not Selvari this time, but Druvan mercenaries with blades that crackled with energy. They cut through the panic with terrible efficiency, and their target was clear. Princess Valeth behind her and drew her blade as the first assassin lunged. She caught the blow and deflected it, spinning to block a second attack from her left. But there were too many of them. The mercenaries were coordinated and fast, and they attacked from all angles at once. Yuna fought like she had never fought before, using every technique she knew, and some she invented in the moment. She wounded one assassin and killed another. But a blade slipped past her guard and cut deep into her side. Pain exploded through her body, and she felt Valith's fear spike through their bond. A second blade caught her shoulder, and a third opened a gash across her back. She fell to one knee, still trying to keep her blade up. But her arms were growing heavy, and her vision was starting to blur. "Finish them both," one of the assassins ordered. "The prince will reward us well." The mercenary stepped forward to deliver the killing blow, and Valith screamed, but it was not a scream of fear. She had spent weeks training with Yuna, learning to fight without sight, learning to trust her other senses, and through their bond, she had felt every technique Yuna had ever known. Valith moved. She intercepted the killing strike with a block that would have impressed any warrior, and before the assassin could recover, she had taken the blade from his hands. It was not graceful. Her movements were desperate and unpolished, but it was effective. She fought with the wild fury of someone protecting the person she cared about most. And through the bond, she felt Yuna feeding her information left. Yuna thought through waves of pain. Now duck. Now strike. A Valith followed every instruction. And slowly the surviving assassins began to fall back. They had expected a blind princess and a wounded human. They had not expected a warrior. Alliance security finally arrived in force, surrounding the assassins and forcing them to surrender. But Valith did not stop until she had confirmed through the bond that Yuna was still alive. "Stay with me," she begged, kneeling beside her fallen partner and pressing her hands against the worst wound. "Please stay with me. I am not going anywhere," Yuna whispered. "We made a vow." The chaos that followed was immense, but certain moments stood out with perfect clarity. Prince Valros tried to slip away, but security forces stopped him at the door. The captured assassins had already confessed. Who had hired them? The representatives who had refused Valith at the bonding ceremony watched in stunned silence as the princess they had called broken stood over the human who had protected her, and Emperor Kelthos walked through the crowd to kneel beside his daughter with tears in his ancient eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I should have protected you. I should have been proud of you." Valith looked at him without accusation or anger. "You can't be proud of me now," she said simply. "I finally have someone who taught me to be proud of myself." Medical teams rushed Yuna to the healing chambers, and Valith refused to leave her side. Through their bond, she could feel Yuna's life force flickering like a candle in wind, and she poured her own strength across the connection. "Stay," she thought fiercely. "You promised to stay," and somewhere in the darkness of her wounded mind, Yuna heard her partner calling. She held on because humans were stubborn, and she had made a vow she intended to keep. Everyone refused to bond with the blind and disabled alien princess, except one human. Yuna drifted in dreams of earth-golden wheat fields under an orange sunset, her grandmother's voice singing old songs, the smell of rain on warm soil. She dreamed of Valith too, of silver wings and clouded eyes, and a smile that made everything worthwhile. When she finally opened her eyes, she found that smile waiting for her. 3 days, Valith said softly, sitting in a chair beside the medical bed with dark circles under her eyes. "You slept for 3 days. You stayed the whole time," Yuna realized, her voice rough from disuse. "Of course I did," Valith replied. "You stayed for me when no one else would." The healing chambers of the Zithrani Palace were the finest in the galaxy, and the medical staff had worked miracles on Yuna's wounds. She would carry scars for the rest of her life, but she would carry them as a warrior, a survivor, in the days that followed. Yuna learned what had happened while she slept. Prince Valros had been arrested and stripped of all titles. His confession had been complete once the evidence became undeniable, and he now awaited trial for attempted murder of the imperial heir. The assassins who survived had been handed over to Alliance justice, And the story of the blind princess who fought beside her human partner had spread across every network in the galaxy. "They are calling you the Guardian," Valeth told her with a hint of amusement. "Some are calling you the Human Blade. I prefer Yuna," she replied dryly, but she could not deny that something had changed when she was finally strong enough to walk the palace halls again. People looked at her differently. Servants who had once ignored her bowed with genuine respect. Nobles who had mocked her stepped aside when she passed. And guards snapped to attention as if she were their commanding officer. The emperor himself came to visit her chambers, something he had never done before. "I owe you a debt I cannot repay," he said, standing before her with his wings folded in formal deference. "You saved my daughter when I failed to protect her. You taught her strength when I taught her shame. She always had strength," Yuna replied. She only needed someone to help her find it. Kalthus was silent for a long moment, his ancient eyes studying the young human who had changed everything. "The court wishes to honor you," he said finally. "They offer you lands, titles, wealth beyond measure, anything you desire." Yuna thought about it carefully before answering. "I desire only one thing," she said. "Permission to remain as Valeth's bonded partner, with no other obligations or expectations." The emperor's expression softened with something like understanding. "That is already yours by right of the bond," he said. "But I grant it gladly." In the weeks that followed, delegations from every species that had rejected Valeth came seeking new partnerships. The Korthani offered military alliances. The Selvari promised trade agreements. And even the Druvan, whose mercenaries had tried to kill her, sent ambassadors with gifts and apologies. Valeth received them all with perfect diplomatic grace. And then she refused every single offer. "I have my bonded partner," she told them calmly. "I need nothing more." The representatives were confused and some were angry, but none could deny her right to choose. She had proven her worth in combat, proven that she was neither broken nor helpless, and by their own traditions, she owed them nothing. One evening, as the chaos finally began to settle, Yuna found Valeth in the palace gardens where they had spent so many peaceful hours together. The princess sat on a stone bench beneath trees that glowed with soft bioluminescence, and her face was tilted up toward stars she could not see. "The Galactic Council has requested that I address them," Valeth said as Yuna sat beside her. "They want me to speak about the attack, about survival, about what it means to be different in a galaxy that values perfection. What will you tell them?" Yuna asked. Valeth was quiet for a moment, and through their bond, Yuna could feel her gathering her thoughts. "I will tell them about a human who saw something no one else would see," she said softly. "A human who looked at a broken princess and saw a whole person." She turned toward Yuna, and even without sight, her gaze was powerful. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Choosing me, protecting me, nearly dying for me?" Yuna took her hand gently. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every moment." The address to the Galactic Council took place in the same chamber where Yuna had first volunteered nearly a year ago. Now, Valeth stood at the center of that platform as Crown Princess, an officially recognized heir to the Zithrani Empire. And Yuna stood beside her as her bonded partner. The representatives of 12 species watched in silence as the princess they had rejected began to speak. "You called me broken," Valeth said, her voice carrying clear across the vast hall. "You said I had no value, no worth, no future, and every one of you walked away." She paused, and the silence was absolute. "One person stayed," she continued. "One person from the youngest and weakest species in this alliance looked at me and saw something worth protecting." She reached out, and Yuna took her hand. "Humans have a saying," Valeth said. "They say that true strength is not about never falling. It is about always getting back up." She squeezed Yuna's hand and continued. "I spent my life being told I was less than others, that my blindness made me worthless, that my wings made me a shame, and I believed it because no one ever told me differently. Until a human showed me that worth is not measured in perfect eyes or perfect wings. It is measured in perfect courage, in perfect loyalty, in perfect love. The word hung in the air like a bell that had been struck. I stand before you today, not because I overcame my blindness, Valith concluded. I stand before you because someone was brave enough to see me for who I truly am. No one is broken, she said firmly. Some of us are simply waiting for someone brave enough to see us whole. The chamber was silent for 1 heartbeat. 2, 3, and then applause began to ripple through the crowd. It started small. Just a few beings, but it grew and grew until the entire chamber was on its feet. Representatives of 12 species bowed to the princes they had once rejected, and to the human who had changed everything by simply saying yes later that night. When the celebrations were finally over and the palace had grown quiet, Una and Valith stood together on their favorite balcony. What happens now? Una asked, looking out at the stars. Valith leaned against her shoulder, and through their bond, Una could feel her contentment like warm sunlight. Now we live, Valith said simply. Together. Una smiled and wrapped an arm around her princess. Somewhere out in the galaxy, there were others like Valith, those who had been told they were broken, worthless, less than whole, and somewhere there were humans who would find them and see them for who they truly were, because that was what humans did best. They saw the worth in others that the universe refused to see, and they protected it with everything they had.